Hello there. Welcome to year 7 of our science class. And in this year, or in this class, we are going to be doing more or less the same what you have been learning in your previous years, that is year 6 downwards. However, in year 7, the science class will be a little bit more detailed. And because of that, it will be split into various categories, and soon you are going to know of which categories you are going to be learning under science. Now, in our introduction to science, not really introduction, but it's introduction to science year 7 and onwards. I'm not saying that you haven't been learning science, but the science you have been learning is with very little details. Since you are going into a science that has more details, I can as well say welcome to a new world of science. Now, it is good to start with some questions, and these questions we shall be answering them as we proceed on. And the first question is, why do we learn science? Why do we learn science? Another question, why do scientists perform experiments? You have heard of this issue of a certain organization, a certain group of people, or in a certain place, something is going on. Scientists are performing experiments. Why do they perform those experiments? Another question is, why do we have rules, particularly rules in science? Why do we have rules? Maybe another question, who is using science? Do you know of anyone who is using science? So to start off, let's look at those 4 questions. Why do we learn science? Why do scientists perform experiments? Why do we have rules, particularly in science? And who is using science? I think with the 4 questions, they can give us a very good introduction to science. So let's start with my 4th question, the last question of who is using science. Maybe from that point of view, you can now really see why we learn science. So at that point, look around where you are seated. If you are more than one, look at your neighbor. Look at the way she is looking or is looking. Look around the room. Are you seeing any objects? Are you seeing any gadget? Even those you think are not related to what I'm trying to mention, just look at them. With the time, you will know that they are part of what I'm mentioning. If you have a phone, get out the phone, look at it. Do you have a watch? Look at it. Do you have specs like me? Remove them. Look at them. Look at the clothing you are putting on. And more importantly, look at that material you are using to write in the name of a pen. Good. I'm sure you must have identified so many objects or so many things around you. And you are now wondering what next after having identified that. Now, after having identified all those items, who is using those items? Even those that you have just imagined, maybe you haven't seen, but back home, back on the road, in the street, wherever, you must have identified or imagined of some items. The question is, who is using those items? And do they qualify to be items associated with science? As I said, as we continue with our introduction, you will see how they fall in line. Now, may I start with the one I said the closest to you, that pen you are using to write. Looking at your pen, and here I have mine, look at this part. You are the one that is used in writing. There is ink in it, the one that is giving us the mark as you are seeing it. How was it developed? There must have been something that was done. And this something was done somewhere. And the somewhere is in the lab. There must have been something that was done for a very long period to come up with the best so that it can be used everywhere. And that was experiments being done. And who did those experiments? It must be a person who was interested in a certain area of study, and that is science. So I've already partly touched the first three questions, as we still continue looking at the fourth question of who is using science. So you can agree with me that you and me, we are already using science. And we always feel comfortable using science. We feel comfortable encountering science. Look at the way we are communicating, me and you. This through a camera. But you are comfortable listening to me, and I'm comfortable talking to you even without seeing you. Why? It is through science. There's a camera which was packed up in a very small thing, an SD card, transmitted to you, and you are comfortable listening to me without seeing me directly. That's the beauty of science. So what does it tell us? The world is being ruled by science. And without science, the world may not be as comfortable as it may look the way it is at the moment. So the answer to the fourth question is you and me and all of us on earth are using or utilizing science. Back to the first question. Why do we learn science? The answer to that partly goes to who is using science. You and me have just said that we are using science. And why we use science is because it is making our life comfortable. It is making our life easy. It is making the life admirable. And that is why you learn science, so that you can even develop much more things, more ways, more routes on how life can be much better. And also to make you understand what exactly goes around you and the rest of the world. We also talked about why are experiments done in science? Why do we carry out experiments? Experiments are done, as the word goes, experiment. You are just trying to see if it is working. In science, it is like you are walking in darkness. And when you are walking in darkness, you can imagine maybe a power blackout happens just on the way to a certain point that you don't understand very well. And you know there are objects along the way. How will you be moving around? You will find that you will be moving by trying to test. Have I reached that object? And if I've reached, can I maybe negotiate using this other part? You see, it is a kind of a trial and error case. As you are doing that, you are doing an experiment. So in doing experiments, you are kind of applying what you call trial and error method of getting something. And in that trial and error, you come up with the best. You can try so many times, like looking at a bulb. How the bulb came into being. It was done more than 900 times. And whoever did it said, I didn't fail the more than 900 times. I only discovered more than 900 times ways on how a bulb cannot work. So, in doing the experiments, you can easily even come up with something that you are not intending to, because it is also important. That was not your objective, but here it is. It has come by. So you have come up with that as you continue with your work to get whatever you wanted. So we do experiments, or experiments are done in science to come up with the best, to check on how best a certain system should work. Just like this pen. Whoever came up with it didn't just wake up at once and decided this is the shape, this is the color, this is the ink, and this is the best. No. It must have been done so many times to come up with the best that we are using at the moment. So, experiments are done in science to get the best. But the question is, as you are doing the experiment, are there any rules you are supposed to follow? The big answer is yes. There are rules you have to follow. Reason being, these experiments are not just in the open, done anywhere. They are done at specific points, depending on the area of study of the individual involved. So, when you are doing that experiment in a special place we call the laboratory, there are rules that have to be followed. And those rules are followed for the safety of you who is carrying out the experiments, and the safety of the room, the safety of those who are around you, and the safety of the world. Without following rules, you may come up with something that can easily ruin the whole world. So as we go on with our study of science, you will come to understand all the things that are being mentioned to be dangerous and how they are dangerous to the world, to yourself, or those around you. Now, just as I've mentioned, there are so many things you identified. And some you must be dying to understand, or to get to understand how they are scientifically related, or how they came into being, or how, if you want to go and learn about it, more about it, what are you supposed to do? Now this takes us to another area, and the area is, why do we look at science in general? Why do we look at science, and how best can we learn science? It's just like partly why we learn science. But I want us to look at it in terms of how do we look at science, and how best can we go about science. So, in looking at what is done in science, science is an area of study that deals with the understanding of all that goes around us. It looks at studying animals. And remember, you and me, we are inclusive as animals. It looks at studying of plants. It looks at studying of microorganisms. In short, it looks at studying living organisms. Now, in looking at living organisms, just the three categories I've mentioned, and they are not the only categories. That is a wide area of study. Just understanding a human being. Forget about the other animals. Understanding just you as a human being, it requires a lot of hours. a lot of hours of study. You are just more than what you think you are. Look at your behavior. That's an area of study. Look at what happens inside your body, what you call physiological processes. And even those physiological processes, there are so many. Look at your blood circulatory system. You look at the nervous system. When you touch yourself, pinch yourself, why do you feel the pain? There must be something happening inside your body. Understanding it requires so many hours. Look at this big computer. This is the biggest computer, your head, the brain. How does it work? Look at the skeleton, the bones, how they have been arranged to suit your operation as a human being. And so many other things. And I'm just mentioning one organism, you, as a human being. Then look at the other animals. Move on, look at a plant. We have so many types of plants. The big plants, the small plants, what we call higher plants and lower plants. Each of that plant has a story to tell. How do you get to know it? You must employ so many hours of study. Look at microorganisms. There are so many. They cause so many effects on earth. Diseases, decomposition, name them. That is just one area of study, and which you can categorize it into a particular area of study. So what I'm trying to say is science is in so many groups or areas of study, and I'm going to give out some of those areas of study, and out of all those we shall pinpoint ourselves or narrow ourselves to one particular area where I will be majorly involved. But we also need to know that they exist before I narrow down to the area of study that I will be covering. So that is biology as an area of study I've been mentioning. I have not mentioned everything. I've just touched on 3 areas. I've not touched something like ecology, how animals live. That's an area of study, and so on. Area of studying insects, entomology, and so many others. In science, we also look at the materials around us, the physical part of life. Look at plastics. Look at metals. Look at chemicals. In particular, go down to looking at water. If there is water around you, look at it. Water is a very special chemical. Look at an acid. We even have it in our own stomachs. Hydrochloric acid, very important. Without it, there are things that cannot work well with us. But remember, I've mentioned hydrochloric acid with respect to you and me as a human or as an animal. But we also have these acids being applied in various ways physically. Look at a car battery. It requires an acid in it, what we call sulfuric acid. Without that acid in that battery, it cannot work. And so many other areas with it. Now, are those the only physical materials you have ever encountered around you? You will always tell me, no. I haven't even started mentioning, because there's just so many. You only picked out a few, and the most common and very important. Mentioned something to do with water, mentioned an acid, mentioned plastics. Those are things we always interact with, day in, day out. And because there are so many, then we need an area of study in science to be particularly dealing with those areas. So these areas of studies I'm trying to mention are what we call branches of science. Branches of science. And the branches of science, the branch number 1 I was talking about was biology, and the one I've just been mentioning is chemistry. These are branches of science. So the branch number 1 is biology. The branch number 2 I've just mentioned is chemistry. Let's look at branch number 3. Now on Earth, you realize that we are always after something called energy. And energy is in so many forms. One of it being what you cannot know that it is existing. You being strong enough to walk around, to sit the way you are seated, to run, to do whatever you normally do. That vehicle being able to move the way it moves. That light being able to light the way it is lighting. That phone being able to do whatever it does. And there's so many materials that are utilizing energy. Now, as you can see, I've already mentioned a good number of items that are involving energy in their operation. So because of that, we need a special area of study, a special branch of science to deal with that particular category of operation, and that is physics. We have physics as an area of study or as a branch of science. You also realize that we need to know our area of living, the niche, the environment. Remember, I'm using you as a human being, but we have so many organisms on Earth. And each of that organism has a particular place it calls home. If you are more than one listening to me, I'm sure each one of you is coming from his or her own home. And that is the best place you think you can ever occupy here on Earth. And even if your friend takes you to their place to live with him or her, after a day or 2 or 3, you will start developing that aspect of wanting to go back to your original home, because you feel that is your best niche. Looking at other animals in addition to human beings, like a leopard, kangaroo, lion, elephant, snakes, and any other animal you know of, they will always feel comfortable in particular regions and not others. And yet, those areas they feel they are not comfortable, another animal will be more comfortable in that region. So, to study such, and remember we are talking about the whole world, to study such areas, we require just a special area of study in science as a branch for you to be able to cover much in that area, and that is ecology, ecological niche, ecology. So we require another branch of science we call ecology. You also realize that we don't have just Earth. We have other planets. We have other heavenly bodies. We have the stars, we have the moon. And all of these things must be understood in a particular way so that you and me can be comfortable. Because you can imagine, you seated there, always seeing the moon, always seeing the sun, seeing the stars. But you have never understood what they are. Will you be comfortable? I'm sure not. You will at least want to know something to do with the moon, why it behaves the way it behaves, why it lights at a particular time, and at a certain time it is not. It is in different shapes. Why? Why do we have the stars during the night? And why are they the way they are? What is this sun? What happens on that sun? Where is it located? How far is it? And now that we are also aware that we have other planets, where are they? How far are they? Are they like Earth? who are these people that will give us the answers? That is an area of study that you must go deep into it for you to understand and give us answers for those who are not in that particular line of study. And these are scientists that we call astronauts. Astronomy as an area of study. So you look at astronomy as an area of study. And so many other areas. I told you that I may not mention all the areas, but I only want to show you that we have so many areas, so many branches of science that you as a student, as you develop in the line of science, you can aspire to enter. And having understood these areas, where we'll be measuring on and where other teachers will also be looking at, you will obviously develop at least one area of study. But I cannot go out of these areas of branches to look at another part before mentioning this one area of study that I feel is very important. Even if that is not the area of study that I'm going to major in, but it's very important, and that is psychology. Psychology as an area of study. Remember, the most advanced animal we have on earth is a human being, you. And the way you behave, the way that neighbor of yours is behaving, the way your father behaves, the way your mother behaves, the way your brother or sister, the way that neighbor of yours behaves, the way that person you met on the street behaves, is very unique to each of that particular individual. Now the question is, why do human beings behave the way they do? And remember, I'm just using human being as an example. All animals behave in particular ways. And they do so because of so many things associated with it. The area into which, that is ecology, where they are living. The items they are interacting with, that is the physical world. Maybe they don't have water. They will behave in a particular way. Maybe there is a lot of pollution. And so many other things. Human beings and other animals will always behave in a particular way. So, for you to understand much more about the behaviors of animals, psychologically, then you need to take that area of study. So, we have another area of study called psychology. So we are looking at another area of study by the name psychology. Now, having seen all these branches of science that we all need to understand, but as you understand, with the time you will start narrowing it down to a particular area of study depending on your interests and what you will wish maybe to accomplish here on earth. Remember, it is good you be remembered for something. And how will you be remembered for that particular something? After you have done so much in it. And you can only do so much in it if you have so much as information about that area. Which means, with the time, always learn to develop a deeper insight of a particular thing and not so much of everything. At least go for one particular area. Now, having looked at these branches of science, we need also to understand some aspects of science. And the aspect which is the biggest is to do with the teamwork. Science is a teamwork subject. Science is a teamwork subject. And as I said earlier, science is majorly performed in an area called a lab or a laboratory. And this one can be either a room or a building, or it can be even in the outside, depending on the area of study. Like for those who deal with the fossils, and for those who deal with the fossils, studying fossils, those that can easily tell you when the first human being came into being, and which type of human being, their size, the type of brain, the size of the brain, the type of animal that was first found on earth. Those that will tell you that have their lab mostly in the field. And you cannot perform it alone. You will always be performing with the others. So science is a teamwork subject. Remember, what I know, my friend will always not be knowing that. But that friend of mine will be knowing something that I don't know. But remember, we are still talking about the same field of study. For example, maybe we are talking about chemistry as a branch of science. In that chemistry, we want to look at a particular chemical, how that chemical is affecting various aspects of life. I may know some bit of it, but some will be a challenge to me, when it is not even a challenge to my friend. So without teamwork, we shall end up not doing much, because each one of us has a limitation. But together, you will always make a good observation, a good discovery of the same. So always put in mind to work in science as a team. Now, why should you be in a team? When you are carrying out experiments in science, you will be doing what we call observations. You are carrying out an experiment, results will be seen. Out of those results, there are observations you will be making out of those results. After the observations, you will record the data of what you are observing. After the recording of the data, you will have to analyze the data. After analyzing the data, you will make conclusions. In so doing, going back to the observation point, there are some observations you as an individual may make and skip some without even your knowledge. And maybe what you have skipped, your friend has done it. When it will come to recording, I'm sure as you will be giving out what you have observed, your friend will also give what he or she observed. By having recorded everything that had been observed as data, looking at the analysis point, I'm sure you will do a good analysis, because you will be basing on all that you had observed. After doing the good analysis, you will now make a good conclusion that, oh, this route of experiment was not the best. Let's follow this one. Because you as teammates, you made conclusive observations, all possible observations to give you good analysis, and out of the good analysis, you gave a good conclusion of what you have been doing. So teamwork is important in science. Now again, why you do a teamwork in science is to make sure that you keep your brother's back. Watch your brother's back. Remember, in science, you are dealing with the things that may be dangerous. So if this is an individual whom you are working with and is encountering a dangerous aspect, situation, chemical, machine, and maybe the individual is not aware, you as the other team player will easily notice the problem and run easily to safeguard your individual, just like it will be done to you next time. And at the end of the day, you will all be happy because he or she will be safe and you will also be safe. So that's why you require teamwork in science. Now this also goes back to what I mentioned to do with the rules. As you are doing the experiment, rules are there to be followed. Rules are there to be applied. And those rules partly are mainly to safeguard you as you endeavor in whatever you are doing. Science is good, but it's dangerous. Why dangerous? Because of the so many things will be using, encountering that are dangerous in one way or another. So rules are there to be followed, which have been obviously set by you and me as human beings. But as a team player, you will also help your teammate to follow the rules for the safety of your project, for the safety of your friend, and for the safety of you as an individual, and entirely for the safety of the lab and the earth as a whole. Furthermore, we also need to look at, as we go on with the science, you also have to make sure that the areas of study you have picked on, like for now, I'm going to entirely enter into chemistry as my area of study. So as you look at that chemistry, try to look at all aspects associated with the chemistry in terms of those that are dangerous and those that are safe. Also look at all areas related to chemistry. Remember, no area of study, no branch of science can stand on its own. They will always be relating to each other in one way or another. So don't just be fixed to one part of science or a branch of science and say, there I am, I'm safe with this. All these areas are related. Also, relate that area of science to the safety of the world. Remember, science is about your comfortability. But in making your life comfortable, we make in one way or another the earth to be uncomfortable. It is an area of discussion. People look at it in different ways. And I would like maybe just to ignite your brain a little bit on that particular area. And that is keeping our earth safe. Keeping our earth safe. Using our areas of studies, our branches of studies that we are going to follow, keep our earth safe. What do I mean by this? Looking at an area of study like chemistry, which is mostly associated with the chemicals, gases or materials like fluorochlorocarbons, CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, were developed. These are compounds that are very much useful when it comes to making of spray, hair sprays. If you have hair, you can spray it and you feel comfortable. The propellant in it is a CFC, perfumes, deodorants. The propellant in that deodorant is a CFC. Fridge. For that fridge to perform the good function it does, you require a gas that is in a liquid form, has a very low boiling point, so that it can be moving around in the fins. When you will be talking about a fridge that is in physics, you will understand that much better. It ends up cooling, which is a very good function. But the other part of this science, which is good, that has made you comfortable having all these things around, smelling so good with that deodorant on, having that hair of yours well kept, having that fridge work very well, and so many other areas where you require sprays. Using CFCs will cause a problem on the part of the earth, on an area we call ozone layer. The ozone layer. This is a chemical that destroys the ozone layer. And ozone layer is an area in the atmosphere covering about 10 kilometers in the atmosphere. Now that layer is very helpful to you and me because it protects us from very powerful rays from the sun, the ultraviolet rays, which causes skin cancer. But because of the CFCs, the ozone layer thickness reduces until it allows some of these dangerous rays to reach the Earth's surface. This has also caused what we call global warming. Global warming, which is an aspect of just raising the temperature of the Earth, making the icebergs to start melting. As they melt, remember, the sea level will change. And as it changes, you discover that it will now be bringing different system from what we are used to. If you are used to seeing rains on a particular month, maybe you will not see that. They will come early or they will delay. The amount of rains, the drought in so many parts of the earth is because of what has been interfered with, and that is the ozone layer. Why? Because of developing some scientific facts, scientific comfortabilities of CFCs. We also have the issue of dumping materials. After you have made something, there are waste materials that will come by. Where do you dump those materials? And of which characteristics are they? Some of these materials are poisonous. You send them into the air, dump in the waters, dump in the soil. At the end, in one way or another, they will enter your body system. So as much as they were good, or they were found or created in the process of making your life comfortable, in a way they will make your life uncomfortable. So what am I trying to say? Let's make sure that as much as we are developing scientific comfortabilities, objects that make our life good, items, situations that make our life comfortable, let's put in mind that our earth is more important than even that development you have done. Because with it and with the harmful environment we are creating, you can easily die before even utilizing the very development you have made. As I conclude on that aspect of the branches of science and majorly on how all these developments are causing problems on Earth, may I say this? Pollution is real, and it is a serious point of discussion. However, as you go on with the studies, don't fear to make steps on making our life better. But put in mind that whenever you are developing an item, look for a way on how to deal with the waste properly. Look at nuclear power energy, which Australia is looking at as an option because we require energy in Australia to run so many aspects. Who are the ones doing this? Scientists. Science in particular is at play here. But the nuclear waste must be looked at very well on how they have to be disposed. You as an individual, make sure you acquaint yourself with enough science knowledge. Why? You may be young at the moment, not able maybe to vote, not able maybe to give conclusive guidelines or conclusions on particular items. But one time in the future, you will be old enough to make those decisions. To do that voting, you need the science to be able to vote wisely. You will soon be voting on maybe things to do with that nuclear power station I've just mentioned. Without the knowledge of science, you will not be able to give a conclusive answer on whether to vote yes or no on that aspect. For those politicians who will be coming around saying, let's look at A, B, C, D, you will not be able to know whether what they are saying is good or bad for you and your generation. But with the knowledge of science, you will always be in a better position to make a good judgment of whatever idea is being floated to you by whoever or by yourself. Now, I said that as I was concluding, we had to look at the aspect of how the knowledge of science should affect your observation of the earth and what you should do always or ask others to do when it comes to their scientific knowledge being put into application. So that one gave us a conclusion of, as you proceed with your making of life comfortable in science, make sure the earth's safety is put to position 1 of your preferences. Position 1 of your preferences, the earth. As you know, this earth started a long time ago, and there were animals that underwent extinction just because of the change in the environmental situations on earth. The same is coming to happen to humanity if we are not comfortable. Now, I want us also to look at another aspect in our introductory bit of rules associated with science. Rules associated with science in relation to what we encounter in our daily life. Not rules associated with the lab. Remember, I had mentioned things to do with the rules associated with the lab. But we also have rules associated with the science, but in relation to what we encounter in our daily life. These rules were developed by humanity. And they were developed because of what humanity, particularly science people, scientists, had done as experiments and made conclusions. One is, to what extent should particular materials be used? May I start with the food? Because the food is the biggest chemical on earth in addition to water. Food and water are the biggest chemicals on earth that no single living organisms can do without. But there are rules associated with this food. What are these rules? I'm sure you must have gone to maybe a supermarket somewhere to buy some food materials. As a good student or individual in our country, don't just go get food stuff and go away from wherever point you are getting. Look on it, look at the packaging, look at the date of manufacturing, look at the date of expiry. That's why you are learning science, to understand your environment, and that is part of your environment. Look at the manufacturing date, look at the expiry date. Why? Because food stuffs have their expiry date. And once you utilize a food material that has undergone destruction, that is beyond the expiry date, you are killing yourself, because you will be poisoning yourself. That food material will have changed, and it is no longer what you thought it is. It is now poison in itself. The same applies to water. You may go somewhere, maybe you want to take water. Don't just take the water. If there are any mechanisms on how to look at that water to ascertain its cleanliness, then do it. If you can't, then look for a better way of getting that water so that you can hydrate your body. And that is to do with the big chemicals, food and water. Let's look at other things. Look at a vehicle. This is a machine we all use to facilitate our movement, and so many other moving machines. They have a restriction put on them, and that is speed. You don't just work with any speed at any point. On highways, in the streets, and so many other places, each area is having a particular speed limit. Why? That's a rule set by scientists. Scientists had done an experiment that on a highway, if this machine can move at this speed, the driver will be able to control the machine. But in a street, at the same speed, you may not be able to control the machine. Probably the bend is so sharp. Maybe highway, the bend can be of that type. But in a street, it is like that type of a bend. Do you think the machine moving at this type of a road and this type of a road will move at the same speed and the driver be able to control? The answer is no. Here, controlling is easier than here. So you'll find that maybe the speed at this point can be 100 kilometers per hour. But here you may be told, move at maybe 60 kilometers per hour, so that you be able to control that machine. Why? Experiments were done, and so many of them. After the experiment, observations were being made. Here, the so maybe vehicles topple. After the observations, analysis was done. After the analysis, conclusions were done. And after the conclusion, rules were set. This is the speed, and we all have to go by it. Also look at levels associated with the, for example, sound. You cannot just go, maybe have your celebration in an estate where people are living, and the sound of maybe the speakers are so high. You will be restricted. Why? Studies have been made by biologists that at a particular level of sound, your ear will not be comfortable. The working of the brain will not be to its optimal point. You will be causing so many disturbances. And studies having shown that rules obviously will be set. And they will say, if you want this type of sound to be used, these are the restricted areas you will apply. And if you are in this particular area, then these are the rules to follow. Look at earphones. You don't expect the sound produced by your earphone to be the same as the sound that will be produced by a speaker outside that earphone. Rules are the earphone must produce manageable sound by the ear. Beyond that, you will destroy what we call the eardrum in that ear. Those are rules, but they were done after experiments, observations, data recording, analysis, conclusions, and thereafter, rules are set. We also have other areas, for example, control measures to do the pollutants. Just as I've mentioned earlier, that whenever you are doing anything, if at all there is a side product or a substance that will be produced that may not be your point of interest, but is being produced, then it has to be produced with limits. Control of pollutants being produced. It is a topic that is everywhere on earth at the moment, that we have to control pollution. Now, how would you set such a rule? Experiments were done, conclusions were made, and rules were set. And the experiments showed that with this particular amount of pollutants in the atmosphere, this is the effect. I talked of CFCs on the ozone. We also have things to do with the production of carbon dioxide. Production of carbon dioxide. We have so many processes where carbon dioxide will be produced, which is a greenhouse gas. So this one is very important when it comes to global warming. Too much carbon dioxide in the air or in the atmosphere causes global warming. So we have to look for ways on how to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide emission to the atmosphere. But do we stop the scientific processes we are doing? No. So the only thing we have to do is continue, but look for a way to restrict on the amount of such being released into the atmosphere. We have to keep our environment, we have to keep our earth safe. Another thing we have to look at is drugs. Our bodies, since you are born until the day you will see your maker, is like a machine. It will always require repair. And the repair to do with you as an animal, remember you are an animal, we need drugs. The question is, how were the drugs developed? Experiments were done. And out of that, rules were set that this type of drug has this type of effect on a human being or this animal, and because of this, it cannot be accessed. It cannot be accessed that easily over the counter. But this one can be accessed over the counter easily. This one must be given out only on a doctor's prescription and in a particular area. So all those rules were set for you and me to be safe. After the so many experiments that were done by scientists to ascertain the effect of the drug on the various organisms that can encounter it and set rules. You can imagine if poisons like cyanide could easily be accessed on the counters. You go to a supermarket and you just see a package of cyanide on the shelf. And here is a child, or even you, without the knowledge that cyanide is a deadly poison. Maybe it has been packaged so well. You might easily pick it, go maybe do some ABCD with it, not knowing that you are killing yourself, only to be found dead. But with the knowledge of science and the rules that have been set, cyanide cannot be found on the shelf and can only be gotten under very special rules associated with it, with the particular people that can only access it. So as you can see, knowledge of science is important because it assists humanity to set rules, and by setting the rules, you set safety to all the animals, and by setting safety to all the animals, life becomes good and helpful to all organisms that are living. That marks the end of our introduction to science, where we have seen all the branches of science, where we have seen that there are so many areas, and therefore with the time you only have to narrow down to a particular branch of science. And you have also seen how important science it is in our lives, because it takes us to a point of setting rules, which is important in life, setting rules and reasonable rules. Until next time, thank you.